Hey everyone, Mr. W here. Our lesson today is on turning fractions into decimals, and this time just using traditional long division today. This lesson's really not on long division, so if you're not comfortable with that, I'll leave a link for that lesson in the description below. So our main idea for when we turn fractions into decimals today is just that we're going to use division, and you would just divide your top number by your bottom number. And remember that we're dealing with fractions and decimals that are just part of a whole. They're not representing whole numbers. For example, a fraction would be something like 3/10. The 3 is a numerator and the 10 is the denominator. And when we're turning fractions into decimals, it's a similar concept, except that decimals, instead of using numerators and denominators, are using place value. And our first three place values would be the tenths, hundredths, and thousands. And I'll show you that in a second. Okay, so let's get started. So our first step to turn a fraction into a decimal using our long division is that we're going to divide the numerator by the denominator. So our numerator is 3. And we're going to divide it by our denominator of 10. So when we divide, we're really asking how many times does 10 go into 3? I can just show you that real fast up here. If I have 3 cookies, right? And I say, well, do I have enough for 10 people? Well, no, 10 will not go into 3. So 10 goes into 3 a total of 0 times. So what do we do? Well, remember, we're dealing with fractions. So when you're dealing with fractions, I can really express 3 wholes as 3 and 0/10. Remember, this is equal. 3 is equal to 3.0. It's just another way of showing it. So now I can say, how many times does 10 go into 30? Now the question is, well, how can you get 30? Real quick, think of it like when you have a whole number of 20, right? 20 would be 2 10s and 0 1s. So you could say, well, 20 is just 2 10s, and that's true. But someone else might say, well, it's really just 20 1s, and both are correct. So think of it this way. We have 3 1s, but the 0 would be in the tens place. So you could really argue that you have 30 tenths. Now, whenever you add a decimal here, which you're allowed to do, you need to add it up here as well. So 10 goes into 30, right? 30 tenths, a total of 3 times. Then you multiply. The 3 times the 10 would again be 30 tenths. I'm just going to express that as 3.0. When we subtract, you can see that we have no remainder. So our answer in decimal form would be 0.3, and you would read this as 3/10 because our whole number is the 0, and our first place value would be the 3/10. Okay, let's try another one. This one's just a tad harder because it's going to involve 2 decimal places, so 3/4, and we want to turn it into a decimal using our long division strategy. First, we're going to divide our numerator by the denominator. So it's going to be 3 divided by 4. Again, I can illustrate that. Pretend that would be 3 cookies, right? And you have 4 people. Well, is there enough cookies for each person? The answer is no, there's not. You can't get 4 into 3. So I'm going to put a big old 0 here. But because we're dealing with fractions, right, we can express this 3 1s as really 3 and 0 tenths. Remember, we said that would be our first place value there. And so I could really think of that as 30 tenths. So if I add a decimal point here, we do it here. Okay, 4 would go into 30 tenths. That would be a total of, I'm thinking that's 7, right? 7 times 4 would be 28, but remember, because we're dealing with, place value, it's 2.8, or in other words, 28 tenths. Don't get too bogged down with that, just it's the 28. If I subtract, I have to regroup, right? And that would be 10. 10 minus 8 would be our 2. I'm going to put my decimal place here, and that would be 0, right? Okay, Does 4 go into 2? No, it doesn't. So because, again, we're dealing with decimals, I'm going to add a 0, which would technically be hundredths, but don't get bogged down with that too much. Does 4 go into 20? Yes, it does. It goes a total of 5 times. 5 times 4 would be 20. Don't forget to add your decimal, right? Because we're dealing with hundredths now. And when you subtract, you can see that we have no remainder. So our answer would be 75 hundredths. So 3/4 is our fraction, can be rewritten to an equivalent fraction, or in other words, decimal, of 75 hundredths. The reason why we say hundredths is, see how that 5 ends in the hundredths place value? So the rule is that you say the name of the place value that you end with. And this 7, of course, is in the tenths. Okay, one more. Let's try a 3-digit one, okay? Same rule, 7/8. And we want to convert the fraction of 7/8 into a decimal using our long division strategy. So we're going to divide the 7 by the 8. All right, so 7. And will 8 go into 7? No, it will not. So we say, well, that goes 0 times, but we can express the 7 as 7 and 0 tenths. In other words, 70 tenths. Again, don't get bogged down with that, but just remember that your decimal point you need to put up here, okay? So, does 8 go into 70 tenths? And the answer is yes, it does. I believe that goes 8 times, right? 8 times 8 is 64, but don't forget your decimal. So we're expressing that as 6 and 4 tenths, but it's, or 64 tenths, right? If I subtract, I'm going to regroup, right? That would become a 10. 10 minus 4 would be 6. Don't forget your decimal place. And 6 take away 6 would be 0. Okay, does 8 go into 6? No, it doesn't. So I'm going to add a 0, which, technically is from your hundredths. But again, don't get bogged down. Just think about the 0. 8 does go into 60. In this case, 60 hundredths. I think that's going to be 7, right? 7 times 8 would be 56. Technically 56 hundredths, okay? When you subtract, I regroup, a lot of regrouping today. 10 take away 6 would be our 4. 5 take away 5 is 0. Okay, so now we have 4 hundredths. Does 8 go into 4? No. So again, I'm adding another 0. This one would be from your thousandths, right? So we have 40 thousandths. Does 8 go into 40? It does. It goes 5 times. 5 times 8 would be 40, but don't forget to add your tenths and your zeros. Okay, it takes a little bit of practice. And notice here that we are not going to get any remainder. So our answer would be 875 thousandths. In other words, 7/8 fraction would turn into the decimal 875 thousandths. And the reason why we say thousandths is, see how the 5 is in the thousandths place value? So you just say the name of the last place value. In other words, 875 thousandths. Okay, everybody, hope that helped today, and we will see you on the next one.